What if I told you that the silence, the heartbreak, the nothing is working season of your life is not the end, but the sacred beginning? What if your loneliness isn't a punishment, but a passage? I remember sitting on the cold kitchen floor, knees pulled to my chest, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the room. I wasn't crying, I wasn't screaming, I wasn't moving. Just still. Hollow. I had just lost everything that gave structure to my identity. The relationship I had poured myself into for years had ended with a single sentence. The job I thought defined me vanished in a phone call. And the version of myself I had carefully curated to look like success, she crumbled quietly in the mirror. And here's the thing that hit me harder than the heartbreak. No one noticed. No grand crisis. No intervention. Life went on around me, and I stayed stuck in a silence that felt like exile. But not the kind of exile we hear about in stories. Not loud or dramatic. This was a wilderness of the soul, a place where nothing looked familiar, and even my own voice sounded like someone else's. I couldn't name it at the time, but now I know what it was. Liminal space. It's what psychologists call the in-between. When you're no longer who you were, but not yet who you're becoming. It's a space that feels like floating, untethered, unsafe, undone. You start to question everything, your worth, your path, your belonging. And when you're there long enough, your silence starts to feel like shame. Like maybe you're here because you're not strong enough. But here's the truth I only discovered through that silence. The wilderness is not the absence of growth, it is the birthplace of it. It strips away everything external, approval, recognition, applause, and forces you to confront the only voice that really matters, your own. It is there, in that unsettling stillness, that something sacred happens. You realize that you've spent years outsourcing your value to the world around you, to titles, to people, to praise. And now, with all that gone, you have the terrifying gift of coming home to yourself. And it's uncomfortable, it's lonely, but it's honest. And that honesty, that's where real healing begins. The world tells us that stillness means you're stuck. But the soul knows better. Stillness means something's growing beneath the surface, something unseen. And if you can sit in the silence long enough, you'll start to hear whispers you forgot existed. You are more than what was taken from you. You are not broken, you're being rebuilt. You are not lost, you're becoming. Silence is not abandonment, it's the sound of your soul finally having room to speak. There's something profoundly disorienting that happens when you begin to change, especially when that change is born out of pain, not inspiration. When life collapses beneath you and you're forced to grow, not because you wanted to, but because staying the same would destroy you. In that wilderness season, when I was unraveling and reassembling all at once, I noticed something I didn't expect. The people who loved me the most began to pull away, not out of cruelty, not even out of indifference, but out of fear. One friend, someone who had been in my life for over a decade, stopped calling. When I reached out, our conversations felt brittle, like walking on glass. She'd changed the subject when I got too vulnerable. She avoided the parts of my story that didn't sound hopeful or polished, and eventually, she faded out completely. At first, I was heartbroken. Then, I was angry. And then, I was ashamed. Ask myself all the questions we ask when someone we love becomes uncomfortable with our becoming. Am I too much now? Am I too dark to be loved? Is my grief pushing people away? It felt like a second wilderness, not just the loss of who I used to be, but the loss of those who had walked with me when I was her. And here's the truth that cracked something wide open in me. Not everyone who loves you is capable of loving your healing. Because healing doesn't always look like progress. Sometimes it looks like crying 3 days in a row. Sometimes it looks like not knowing what you believe anymore. Sometimes it looks like saying no to people you used to bend over backwards for. According to attachment theory, our relationships are deeply shaped by how safe people feel in their own emotions. And when you start to feel deeply, to question deeply, to confront deeply, it can trigger the unresolved discomfort in others, especially those who have learned to survive by avoiding pain. So when they back away, it's not always rejection. Sometimes it's a mirror they're not ready to look into. It took me a long time to accept this, but I'll say it to you like I wish someone had said it to me. Losing people during your healing doesn't mean you're going backwards. It means you're outgrowing environments where your pain had to be quiet to keep the peace. It means you're becoming more honest than they know how to handle. It means you're no longer making yourself small to stay lovable. And that's a hard, holy thing. Because the wilderness doesn't just test your endurance, it tests your belonging. But here's the miracle buried in that loss. The loneliness you feel now is making room for deeper, truer connections later. The kind that don't need you to perform. The kind that stay when the light is gone. I once read, "You will lose people you thought would never leave, but you will find yourself, and that is a fair trade." And when I look back now, I know that's the truth. Let them go. You're not the same. And that's not a failure. That's growth in motion. There was a night, I remember it vividly, when I sat alone in my car after a long drive, engine off, porch light glowing in front of me, and I couldn't bring myself to go inside. I gripped the steering wheel, stared straight ahead, and whispered out loud, "What if I don't come back from this?" I wasn't talking about death, I was talking about identity. About the quiet terror of becoming unrecognizable to yourself. That's the fear no one talks about when you're in the wilderness. Not just the fear of what's happening, but the deeper, more disorienting fear of who you're becoming. What if this version of me disappears? What if the old me is gone for good? What if I don't even want to come back? People love to say, "You'll bounce back," as if life works like a rubber band. As if we always return to who we were before the heartbreak, before the diagnosis, before the loss, before the truth unraveled everything. But that's not what actually happens. You don't bounce back. You break open. Psychologists who study post-traumatic growth tell us that in many cases, people do not return to their previous state of being. Instead, they emerge as someone profoundly changed. Sometimes quieter, sometimes braver, but always rearranged. There's no neat return. There's only redefinition. And that's terrifying because the ego, the part of us built on titles, identities, consistency, craves familiarity. It wants to recognize itself in the mirror. So when you start to change, not on the surface, but deep in your bones, it feels like a kind of death. And in many ways it is. You mourn the you that believed everything would work out easily. You grieve the version of yourself that didn't question the people you once trusted. You say goodbye to the old coping mechanisms, the performance, the constant striving. But here's the paradox. The person you fear losing was never the whole of who you were. She was the survivor. He was the performer. They were the version of you that made it through a world that taught you to be small, agreeable, and vulnerable. When you fear not coming back to that version, what you're really fearing is unfamiliar freedom. The freedom to choose differently. The freedom to not hustle for your worth. The freedom to say, I don't know who I am right now, but I'm not going to rush to fill the silence with a lie. And that takes a kind of courage that's rarely celebrated. The wilderness strips away everything that is not essential. And yes, it feels like dying. But it's the kind of death that brings life. Not instantly, not painlessly, but honestly. You don't emerge as a shinier, more polished version of yourself. You emerge softer, wiser, more compassionate toward yourself and others. You walk differently, slower, but more rooted. You stop apologizing for your pain. You stop begging the world to recognize your worth. Because now, you know it wasn't theirs to define in the first place. And one day, quietly, unexpectedly, you realize you didn't come back to who you were. You came home to who you've always been. The self beneath the mask, the soul beneath the survival. And that is more than enough. I used to believe that if I could just understand why something happened, if I could just make sense of the pain, then I could heal from it. I became obsessed with answers. I wanted explanations, clarity, closure. I thought if I could wrap the loss in a story with a beginning, middle, and end, I could walk away clean, with no lingering ache. But the wilderness doesn't work like that. It doesn't hand you answers. It doesn't offer easy meaning. It leaves you staring into the fog, holding pieces of a life that no longer fits together, and no map to show you what's next. I remember begging for closure after someone I loved walked away without warning. One day we were talking about the future. The next, they were gone with no explanation, no confrontation, just absence. And that absence rang louder than any words could have. I waited, but the call never came. The apology never arrived. The questions never got answered. And in that waiting, I discovered something brutal but necessary. Closure is not something we get from others. It's something we give to ourselves. Psychologists who study grief and unresolved trauma say that one of the most painful experiences we can face is ambiguous loss. The kind where you don't get to say goodbye, don't get a clean ending, don't get to understand why. It's a wound without a narrative. And the brain doesn't know how to close an open loop. So we spin, we obsess, we replay every moment looking for clues, thinking maybe if we'd done something differently, the outcome would have changed. But healing doesn't come through explanation. Healing comes through acceptance. And acceptance doesn't mean agreement. It doesn't mean what happened was okay. It means we choose to stop waiting for a version of the story that will never arrive. We stop hoping the past will rewrite itself. We stop holding our breath for closure and start exhaling into the unknown. That moment, that terrifying moment when you decide to stop looking backward and start walking forward, even if you don't know where the path leads, that's courage. It's raw, it's shaky, it's real. Sometimes courage looks like getting out of bed when nothing makes sense. Sometimes it's choosing to trust again even when you've been betrayed. Sometimes it's letting go of the need for justice, apology, or validation. Because the truth is, some people will never say sorry. Some stories won't resolve. Some endings won't feel fair. And still, you can heal. You can breathe again without understanding everything. You can choose to become whole, even with unanswered questions. I once wrote this in the darkest chapter of my life, and it still grounds me when the ache resurfaces. Closure is not a door someone else has to open for you. It's the moment you stop knocking and start walking. You don't need perfect clarity to move forward. You need courage. The kind that whispers, even without all the answers, I choose life. That choice, again and again, is the beginning of your return to yourself. I won't pretend the wilderness is beautiful when you're in it. That's something people say when they've already made it to the other side. But when you're still inside, when your life feels like ash, when your identity is scattered and your heart is barely stitched together. It doesn't feel sacred. It feels cruel. But there comes a moment, quiet and unannounced, when something small inside you starts to shift. Not a grand epiphany, not a lightning bolt, just a soft awareness that maybe, just maybe, you're not as lost as you thought. Maybe the grief is doing something. Maybe the loneliness has carved out space. Maybe the silence has been preparing the soil for something you've never known before. That moment doesn't arrive with applause. It arrives when you catch yourself laughing again for the first time in months, and it doesn't feel forced. It arrives when you see your own reflection and you no longer wince. It arrives when you realize you can sit with your pain without needing to numb it, fix it, or explain it away. That's the real miracle of the wilderness. Not that it gives you what you wanted, but that it makes room for what you needed. Not that it restored your old life, but that it gave birth to something truer, deeper, and more aligned with who you actually are. Ugh. I remember walking down a familiar street months after everything in my life had fallen apart. The houses looked the same, the trees were still there, but I wasn't the same. And for the first time, I didn't mourn that. I didn't ache for the old version of me. I felt gratitude for her, for the one who endured the fire, who sat in the dark, who kept breathing through the nights that felt unbearable. And I felt something else too. I felt free, not in the glittery social media way, but in the soul level, I don't have to prove myself anymore kind of way. I didn't need to hustle for love. I didn't need to pretend I was okay. I didn't need to ask permission to exist as I am. The wilderness had taken so much, but it had given me back the one thing I never knew I was missing: myself. That's what wilderness seasons do. They break what was brittle. They tear apart what was performative. They unravel what was never truly you. And then slowly, patiently, they begin to rebuild you, rooted in truth, grounded in compassion, aligned with your soul. You don't leave the wilderness with a spotlight. You leave with a lantern, lit by everything you've walked through, survived, surrendered to, and grown beyond. You stop asking, when will this end? And you start asking, what is this making of me? And that's where everything changes. Because now you're not walking through life trying to get back to who you were. You're walking forward into who you were always meant to be. So if you're still in the thick of it, still wandering, still wondering, hold on. Don't rush the process. Don't try to skip the ache. Let it shape you. Because the truth is, you're not being buried, you're being planted. And the you that rises from this will be more grounded, more honest, more whole. And one day, when the wind hits just right and your soul feels light again, you'll whisper to yourself, maybe through tears, maybe through a smile, I thought the wilderness would destroy me, but it's where I finally found my way home. If you're in the wilderness right now, don't rush it, don't numb it, don't spiritualize it away. Stand still, breathe deep, let the unraveling happen, because the you that comes out of this will be the most whole, rooted, and radiant version you've ever known. You're not being punished. You're being prepared for the kind of life that doesn't require pretending to feel like love,